Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Coach's Corner. We are going to follow up tonight on an episode we started back in April. We did a part one of the Fire Book from Book of Five Rings by Miyamoto Musashi. We got about halfway through the chapter. We talked about a number of the topics in there, and tonight we want to follow through and hopefully get the rest of the book discussed. So welcome, coaches. We have Duke Branas, Duke Eliyahu, Baron Louis with us tonight. And then Captain Sivert is behind the scenes, and he's doing our producing tonight. So thank you, Sivert, for doing that for us. So welcome, everybody. Good to have you here. All right, so let's just jump right in. We're about halfway through, and just to recap, the Book of Five Rings is one of those classics of strategy, and it's a very concise, even painfully concise book. There is not a lot of words in it. It's a very fast read, but it's very, very deep. In fact, in the last episode, most of the single topics we talked about might include 3 or 4 sentences, but they usually had about 20 minutes of discussion on them, just because it's so easy to get lost with what the intended meaning was. And one of the issues is the translation. We're going to run right square into that tonight with the very first topic, picking up halfway through the chapter. Different translations can have drastically different words in them, and so it can be difficult to sort out. Japanese can be very tricky to translate into English, and this is no exception. So we'll just jump right in with the first topic. And that is, we wrapped up the last episode with crossing at a ford, which talked a little about kind of taking not necessarily the most obvious, but the most direct route to solve your problem. And we went into that in depth. The next one is called, in the translation I'm using, it says to know the times. And Eliyahu's got a different translation there.
The translation I have calls it realizing the situation.
Exactly. So, and this is a perfect example of how there's no one perfect translation of this work. You kind of have to do it by committee, see some different ones. In fact, I do want to invite everybody tonight, if you have a comment or a question, please throw it up. We'd love to get your insight with it, because when we present this, we're merely presenting our own thoughts and impressions on what we're reading. Not that we are absolute scholars on this and are perfectly correct on our interpretation. This is a work that invites you to keep coming back to it again and again and again as your experience and understanding increases, and you will see new things and different things and get a different level of understanding every time you read it. It's really a remarkable book in that way. So to know the times, what he writes here, he says, to know the times means to know the enemy's disposition in battle. Is it flourishing or is it waning? By observing the spirit of the enemy's men and getting the best position, you can work out the enemy's disposition and move your men accordingly. You can win through this principle of strategy, fighting from a position of advantage. When in a duel, you must forestall the enemy and attack when you have first recognized his school of strategy, perceived his quality and his strong and weak points, attacking in an unsuspecting manner, knowing his mettle and modulation and the appropriate timing. Knowing the times means, if your ability is high, seeing right into things. If you are thoroughly conversant with strategy, you will recognize the enemy's intentions and thus have many opportunities to win. And I'm going to channel my inner Bess here and say, he ends it with, you must sufficiently study this, which was kind of a point of humor in the last episode, where almost every chapter or every little paragraph is ended with, you must study this in detail, or you must practice this, or you must contemplate on this.
Yeah, it won't be the last time you hear that one.
And it won't be the last time. So we can almost turn this into a Musashi drinking game.
Yeah.
This translation that I have ends with, you must work this out, which is implies something different. Mm-hmm. And I've thought often that you must study this doesn't mean you must read about it. It means you must practice it. You must physically do the thing to learn it. You can only learn so much by reading. You can learn a lot by reading, but you have to actually do the thing. And I think that study in this sense means you must work on it. You must work this out. You must physically apply these things and do them. You can't simply master it by reading about it.
Agreed.
Yeah.
And I think if we cover these kind of one by one, knowing the enemy's disposition in battle, is it flourishing or it's waning? This is something that comes, I think, down to attitude, and it does translate directly into single combat as well as melee combat, because you can have instances where you've got an opponent that is fired up and energized and ready and on that sharp edge of competition, and that can turn into being demoralized and having lost their will, or confusion overcomes them, or hesitance, or many different things can impede their mindset that will take them off of that edge. I remember at Appenzic many years ago, they had a mountain pass battle that was an endless resurrection, and the victory condition was such that it was only at the end were the flag's going to be counted. And I do recall this because the East kept most of their force out of the battle the whole time, with the theory, and this sounded great on paper, that if we only commit, a third of our force and we keep a whole bunch of people fresh at the very end, that the mid-realm side would exhaust themselves fighting for an hour and a half res battle, or hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever it was. And the result was that the mid-realm had its whole side show up. We fought past the mountain passes, and we were fighting the entire battle right outside the eastern res point. Well, by the time it came to bring in the fresh 2/3, the first third had it. They would just like, screw this, we're just getting beaten, we don't like it, and a lot of them never showed up. Meanwhile, the mid-realm side was getting energized by overwhelming their opponent for 90 minutes. And so the big push that was supposed to happen completely fizzled. It was I think this is it. The enemy's disposition from the standpoint of the troops was broken, and they were never going to get it back. I can see where the plan on paper looked like it was going to be a good move, but it turned out to be not a good move.
So I'm gonna jump back a little bit, and I agree 100%. But I actually think that's covered in a different, the idea of demoralizing or slowing or putting your opponent to sleep is covered in a different scenario. I think they blend actually a little bit. One is this is talking about recognizing your opponent's weaknesses, and that is the idea of drawing your opponent out. Let's take your case. I see an opponent across from me trembling to throw, and he's on the edge, and he's ready to go. I'm realizing this and then managing that experience. In other words, I'm going to pull him into the long game. Mm-hmm. I may think I'm going to pull him. I'm going to let him use all that energy he wants. I'm not going to let him get close. I'm going to let him burn a little bit until he starts losing that mindset. And then I will see when he loses that mindset and that game changes. So this is the idea that you can see and understand where your opponent is going, or what's presented in front of you. And this could go all the way from the weapons they use, the dangers of those weapons, and the dangers of those person. It could even, in melee, it's dangers of how the weapon is, the melee groups and how they're set up. But it's also terrain, which is a part of that. You have to be aware of those things, and how to use those things allows you, the more you're aware of those, of the whole board, the easier it is to essentially win.
Sure. And I would imagine that in terms of fighting a real battle where lives are on the line, the risk is much higher than we have in our sport. The idea that of morale is even far greater, of having troops or probably levies like the Ashigaru, the recruits and whatnot. They're not the full professional soldiers, but they're more like what do you call them when you recruit them from the citizenry. You say, here, grab a spear. You need to go fight. And they're scared out of their minds.
Yep.
They know they're not trained very well, and they're likely going to die. Those influences, I think, are pretty huge in terms of what he's talking about from the standpoint of being a general or being, a soldier on a real battlefield. Especially when you only need to cause harm, cause injury to about 10% of a force, and they become useless. Their morale just completely sinks. But then we get to this point. I think this is what you were talking about the dual part, right?
You're talking to Eli?
This still applies to one-on-one.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah. I mean, the idea of one-on-one is even easier to see it, tell you the truth, being commanding and being an overall commander at Penzic, when you're looking at lots of troops and trying to figure that out. There's so much more going on because of terrain, setup, weather, your troops, how your troops feel. Because if it's hot, it changes the game. If it's sunny, it changes the game. All of those pieces are parts you have to think about there. In a single combat, you have to recognize inside of opponent, so that there's an emotional connection that you have to make and read, and you can feel the tension from them and things like that. So that's I think we read two things, but it's all about reading what is in front of you and understanding that, because if you can't understand that, you're already behind the 8 ball. So, Eli, you got something on it?
Yeah, he seems to be talking here about, and I agree, it's about reading what's either your enemy, the army in front of you, or your individual opponent. And it is, he refers to the physical disposition of troops or the individual, and also their spirit, whether it's high or low, and also the environment. So it's all of those factors, and that calculation, I think that in individual combat, you should be doing that before you even engage.
Oh, definitely.
I remember teaching someone, and I said I knew exactly what he was going to do, because I could tell from his stance where the damage was on his sword, where the damage was on his shield, where the damage was on his armor, and his physical eagerness. I knew that he was going to charge me, and so by knowing that, shifting my Musashi talks about strategy, meaning how you, well, he's got a whole section on what strategy means, but he uses that. It means denying them what they want and doing what you want. So just as you said, if someone wants to fight in close, I'll fight them at distance. Someone wants to fight at distance, I'll get in close. Someone wants to, it's being a master of many different ways, of many different types of strategy, as Musashi would call it, so that you can do what they don't want you to do to make it a winning scenario for you. But you have to take into account all of those factors.
Louis.
That's true. And this is where I get that crossover into Sun Tzu's, know yourself and know your enemy, and in 100 battles, you'll never be in peril. And I like the way you describe that, of by the time you engage, you should have all of that assessment and pretty much know how things are going to come out. I remember reading a story about Napoleon as a young officer, and he was, he wasn't a senior by this point, but he was commanding, a small group of soldiers, and his commander asked him, they looked across the line and they saw, the enemy lined up, and he said, well, what do you think? He says, well, that unit on the end, they're going to run. He just knew it right away by being able to read what was about to happen. So they formed their plan on not even having to deal with that end unit. And I guess it turned out that that's exactly what happened. As soon as the engagement started, they chickened out and took off and were gone. And so, with that astute, being able to read your enemy and know what they're going to do, and not just by a good guess, but by you've deduced down to what you think they're going to do. And that might be some pre-knowledge of knowing what an individual fighter's like, or what a commander tends to do, or just reading what you can see from the day. Either any of those, I think, apply to knowing the times, or knowing that situation, and knowing your enemy.
And the opposite of that is true, is that while you're doing this, your enemy is trying, or opponent is trying to do that to you. And so that's where we get into hiding your intention, misdirection, showing a false intention, all of those things, so that your opponent thinks your intention is something else than what it is.
Absolutely. And I think Sun Tzu talks about that, when you're strong, feign weakness; when you're weak, feign strength. You talk about the simplest of deceptions, but it's still a reliable and time-tested method, especially for luring in opponents. When you're strong and you appear weak, it tends to draw them in. All right, so let's move on. Let's go to tread down the sword. And I'm curious if Eli's translation is different from this.
It says crushing the sword with your foot.
Yeah, I've read that one too. Neither of them make a lot of sense, but
yeah, I don't know exactly what the translator was.
Well, there's
like
a certain
said,
there's in all of the translations I've seen of Musashi, there's a certain amount of poetry, because the poetry conveys the way Musashi wrote, but because he was a poet and an artist, and in addition to obviously being a swordsman, but what does he mean by that? And we're lacking some of the understanding of the idioms of his time and his culture. So we can, and that's one of the problems with translation. So crushing the foot or treading down it's not as literal as crushing the sword. You can think of the sword as symbolic, I think, in this case.
Yeah, the Japanese were huge on the symbology of the sword, for sure.
Yeah.
So here's the. Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, so in this translation that I had, it said, tread with the feet, the body, the spirit, and weapon as they begin to strike. So really, it seems like as they start to attack, you interrupt their attack with another attack, and you give them energy and commitment.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they talk about it in translation. They talk about this as if you're waiting for your enemy to fire, and they're done firing and you're done receiving, and then start, they have time to essentially reload before you actually get your attack again. So instead, they fire is the time when you go. You're not right. There is no waiting, and so that way you're not back and forth type of scenario. It means we're on. And we are going, and in what we do, that would be, your opponent throws a sword, I block. Now I throw, he blocks. Now he throws, I block, and you get caught up into another thing that we cover later here, and you're stuck in that block throw parallel, and so now you have to change time. In this effective idea is that the time when, as soon as they begin, you begin.
And really important with that, I think, is that you can't be thinking about what you're going to do next. You have to be prepared to make a decision as things are changing and reacting to the situation, but not going after some, like, I'm going to do this thing next as soon as they attack, and I'm going to counter this way. Well, that counter might be completely useless. So it's really got to be a reactive situation. So if you posture yourself in a way, like say you're leaning, well, then you can't go backwards. And if you're, you've got to be in this, ready position.
Yeah, because they like Brana says, they describe it in terms of the strategy. When the enemy first discharges bows and guns and then attacks, it's difficult for us to attack if we're busy loading powder into our guns and notching our arrows. And even boxers will say the best time to hit somebody is after they've extended and they're pulling their hand back. You follow the hand back because that thing can't hit you again. So you have that little gap in there where you're safe to actually enter and cover ground. And I think that applies especially for boxers who don't have the arm reach that their opponent does. They need to have that gap of time where they can enter, and they're not just walking straight into a loaded, cocked arm ready to fire. And I what Louis pointed out, I really like this, where, and this is in the last of the 3 paragraphs. It says, treading does not simply mean treading with the feet, which I assume means stepping forward. It says tread with the body, tread with the spirit, and of course, tread and cut with the long sword. I think that it has the mentality of attack, which is more than just stepping forward. You can step forward and not have an intent to attack. And I'm sure we have all experienced this and watched somebody just walk up and get hit. Because their spirit is not moving forward or moving into the attack.
Well, not engaging. I guess your spirit is not actually engaging in the fight, is what I would put that as.
Right.
They're still waiting, and
exactly.
that waiting. If you're waiting for something, you're going to get it sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where that mind part comes in as well. So you have to be in a frame of mind to apply intent.
One of the, and Ronis, you probably have run across this same challenge of teaching somebody to have the intent to attack even though they are moving backwards.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Because you're not necessarily out of the fight. Just because you're moving backwards does not mean you're disengaging, and it does not mean you are leaving the fight.
No, you're pulling.
You're
the pushing
range. You're keeping a desired range, but your intent is still forward, even though you're moving back.
Yes, 100%.
And that's one of the harder things that I've noticed to teach people in Aikido, that when I teach them, is how to turn and not think of falling back, or how to shift backwards but have their intent going forward.
He does comment that that waiting is being defensive as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a footnote in the translation I have that says that crushing the sword with your foot is their translation of the Japanese ken ofumu. That Musashi uses the term ken to mean sword, but it also means has another meaning, a place, a difficult to get past, or a difficulty. So you're crushing the difficulty, not just crushing the. So it has that poetic multiple meaning of a difficulty as well.
Right. When I would train people in melee, I would teach them the difference between refusing and routing. Routing is when you just want to boogie out of there and you're done. Like you have no more fight in you. But refusing is when you can back up, and I guess you'd call it skirmishing as well. You can.
That's what I prefer to call it.
Give ground and fight them.
Yes. And actually, that's
an important skill. If you can't do that, you're not a good melee fighter.
And the problem is it's not taught enough. We always get here's the words I hate the most. Give them a soft deny. Immediately, what that means is I'm on my heels, and I'm going backwards. And that is not. This is exactly what we just talked about. Is that's the mindset of your opponent and evaluating that. And if the mindset is essentially falling back and not fighting, then it's not fighting.
Right.
And instead, deny means whatever you have to do to not allow them to get around. Now that could even be go forward first.
Mm-hmm.
And then stretch and fall back while fighting.
Mm-hmm. It's easy to make mistakes when you're moving. And even though you're moving forward, which is the most natural movement we humans have, is to go straight forward. But even then, you still give opportunity to be hit. And I remember one of the shows that Alanon was on a while back. He said, "I really like the look that you give me when you're rushing towards me."
Exactly.
Because he will often fight on that refusal, but he stays in his range. And when you're moving and even running towards him, he's watching those openings open and close, and will usually find one. And I think in melee is the same way. It's easy for a unit or fighters within a unit to start to get eager when they see their opponent backing up, and they will create gaps. They will make mistakes as they're going forward, as long as you're ready enough to exploit them. That's the key, that intent in the fight.
It can look like what Sun Tzu says of presenting weakness when you're strong. It can appear that way, even though it isn't necessarily, but it can appear that way to your opponent.
Right. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to no collapse. Eli, what is this one called in your translation?
Recognizing the instant of collapse.
Okay.
The footnote, let me see.
I love this.
Now, the footnote, it's recognizing the instant of collapse.
Yeah, in fact, I like that one better than my translation.
I've got another one. Everything can collapse.
Yep.
So,
and it says everything can collapse. How does bodies and enemies collapse when their rhythm becomes deranged? And I think you could say when their rhythm is broken.
Yeah, deranged, broken, same. Yep.
Yep. And,
but for each thing, there's an instant in which it collapses. And recognizing that instant, the instant of collapse in an opponent or an adversary is significant, because you have to not give them time to recover from that collapse.
Right.
So it says to pursue them at this time, and do not let them recover. They might not be so careless later in the fight.
Right.
Right.
And that's a good lesson, to not take for granted that you have an opportunity, thinking that you're going to have another one and another one and another one. And to me, that's part of that the spirit of being energized and ready to engage, ready to take advantage of an opportunity without hesitation and without, I guess, being ready to follow through with it until it becomes untenable. In fact, he says this in large-scale strategy: when the enemy starts to collapse, you must pursue him without letting the chance go.
Yeah.
If you fail to take advantage of your enemy's collapse, they may recover. And we just posted up a
I was
video.
going to say that.
Yeah, exactly. Just posted up a video today about it was a breakdown by Jeff Thompson about adrenaline in a fight. But within that fight, and they actually interviewed the boxer. He had his his opponent dropped him on his knees, and he started to kind of celebrate. In his mind, he thought, okay, I've got this. And he kind of stood up to, once, of course, in a boxing match, once your opponent's down, you can't just keep hitting him. He backed off. But in his mind, he shifted away from this fight is on and I need to finish this, to I got this. It's, we're good to go. And then the guy got up and he rallied his mental focus, and he came back and actually knocked the other guy out. And I think even there, considering the gap in the sport, where when somebody's down on their knees, you have to let them get back up.
Oh.
The mind changed.
Yes.
And that was huge.
And this is where they talked about the adrenaline change, but the same thing's happening, right? So he spikes in adrenaline late in the rounds. I mean, we're talking 2 heavyweight world champions, right? I'm the baddest people on earth, right? In boxing. And, it's Klitschko, who had been, had held it with his brother for so many years. People were tired. And Joshua, who's a technician. And, Joshua got a couple of hits in, adrenaline pumped. And then the next thing you know, he was hammering Klitschko until he was on the ground. He didn't even look at him after he fell. And immediately Klitschko hit the ground and started back up because you could see the determination in his eye. If Joshua would have stood there in the corner and gave him that same determination back, it would have been different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot to it. And I think he thought he saw collapse, but he did not see collapse. He misread that his opponent. He flat out
renewal, right?
Yeah,
I mean, his opponent showed him.
Yeah, exactly. Overlooked that he might recover. In single combat, the enemy sometimes loses timing and collapses. And I think we've all seen this where somebody has almost interrupted themselves or they allowed themselves to be interrupted. And I think in the previous chapter, they used the word forestalling. I think that applies here to you see somebody get interrupted, whether that's mental interruption or physical, and you'll usually see the physical will follow the mental. But if you really start to get to read people well, you can start to see when their mind is drifting or when it's
overwhelmed.
They have that momentary confusion.
Yeah.
Things like that.
They're overwhelmed with emotion usually is what happens in that scenario is they don't know what to do next. And it's breaking down. And the question is, are you going to give them the out or are you going to keep them in that space and drive them deeper?
Right. And that's, I think, what he covers in the last paragraph in this, which is you must keep your eye on the enemy's collapse, chase him, attacking him so you do not let him recover. The chasing attack is with a strong spirit. You must utterly cut the enemy down so that he does not recover his position. So yeah, once you have that opening, you tear it all the way open. And I think that's one of those, in terms of a FCA single combat fight, that's really, especially against two fairly evenly matched opponents, that's a lot of that battle is, all right, who's got the initiative part and who can take control of the mental exchange going on in that fight. And that to me is where I don't know what the word would be, intricate maybe, exchange that goes on a high level, two highly skilled opponents in an SCA fight is you're going to see it more of a mental game than a physical.
Oh yeah, all the time. And that mental game is actually, it's interesting because that mental game is not only because we don't die. That mental game is not only in that fight, but it carries over to the next. This is the idea of you beat somebody before you go to ground.
Yep.
Right? Yep. Because mentally you have defeated them. And you want to keep them there. As soon as you crack and they win a fight, that's a crack. The question is, will you let them continue to widen that crack until they're your equal or better?
And that's a unique part from the SCA perspective because we will often fight the same opponents over and over again. They get to know us. We get to know them. You know, a lot of fighters will keep a little mental tally in their head of how they tend to do against this particular fighter. And it goes both ways, I'm quite certain. And yeah, exactly. So that collapse can be in your head of, the last 3 times I've faced this person, I've relentlessly gotten beaten. And can you recover? That's the key to that game. And we're not fighting for our lives, but it means something to us when we face somebody that, we either want to continue our trend of prevailing over them, or we want to turn the trend around of them prevailing over us. All right. Anything else anybody wants to cover on that one? No, I think we're good. Okay, let's go to become the enemy. To become the enemy. To become the enemy means to think of yourself in the enemy's position. In the world, people tend to think of a robber trapped in a house as a fortified enemy. However, if we think of becoming the enemy, we feel that the whole world is against us and there is no escape. He who is shut inside is a pheasant. I'm not sure what he was talking. Oh, here, he who enters the rest is a hawk. You must appreciate this. The pheasant being prey, the hawk being a predator. in large scale strategy, people are always under the impression that the enemy is strong, so tend to become cautious. I think that's something that new and even intermediate fighters will often, newer fighters especially, will often view that their opponent is always more skilled, always more experienced than they are, and that they're really fighting an uphill battle. And chances are they're not wrong. But I think looking through your opponent's eyes is helpful. Maybe not in the middle of a fight, but in understanding where they are at. And this kind of, I guess, kind of harkens back to the to know the times. You get to know your opponent and analyze them by looking at things through their eyes, what they're seeing. It can be kind of tricky to do, especially when you're flooded with thoughts of your own of, okay, what do I need to do? What are my strengths? But again,
that's the problem. This goes down to confidence, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's really, and this goes, confidence comes in, and this is one of these pieces that we don't talk enough about. I spend a lot of time on teaching people technique, but I also spend even more time teaching people confidence. Someone has to know that they can hit people. So if you're always blocking stuff, then that's what they're used to. In fact, after a while, you could drop your shield and they will still hit your shield. You see where I'm coming from there?
Yeah.
Because that's what they're used to. So this is the same thing I've seen some boxers do, where there's actually a great kick or a Thai boxing coach that's relatively brutal, but he actually plays out being knocked out. So he'll let somebody hit him and he'll fall down. He's not hurt. He's not anything. But what he wants to do is get his opponent used to winning.
Right.
And letting them know that they can win and this is what it's like. Right. And I think that's what we're talking here a lot. And it's super difficult in the SCA because I'm going to tell you, there's only, there's not many people. There's probably people that are way overconfident and that hurts them as well. But there's not many people that don't walk into battle and go, oh man, I don't know. And I guarantee you there's people, I walk out against Al-Anon, I'm like, motherfucker, this is going to be a rough one. Right?
Yeah.
So, and there's still confidence here because, I've won fights with him, we've traded a lot. And so I'm not giving up. But you're going out there. This is a battle. That's not super easy because the only way I got there is because I know I hit him.
Right. And if you doubted that even a little bit, it would be harmful to your performance.
Yes.
Like it would change things around quite drastically.
There's a quote in there. It says, if you think they are the master of the way who knows the principles of strategy, then you will surely lose.
Right. Yeah. And I think that speaks right to that overconfidence that Ron's mentioned.
So elsewhere, though, Musashi balances everything he says in one place with something he says somewhere else. So he says here that there's a tendency to overestimate the strength of your adversaries and be too prudent. But there's also a problem if you underestimate your adversaries and you're too bold.
Yeah.
So it's balance. And he talks about balance in a lot of ways throughout what he writes. And he just talked just a moment ago about accurately assessing your adversary. And accurately assessing your adversary and yourself, which we would call veritas and humilitas, right? In the European medieval knightly chivalric virtues, that is necessary so that you can still approach with confidence, understanding that your opponent is more skilled, but still approach it with confidence because you're not allowing yourself to be defeated before it begins, but you're not overestimating them. You're not underestimating them.
It's a battle. We're going back to creating that battle, right? And everyone is a battle, and you can't give that up. And then you have to read the scenario. You have to read when they're weak of mind or strong of mind, and manage those things. Like you said, somebody's strong of mind. There's sometimes when you want to show them some weakness, so you pull them into that aggressive behavior, like you talked about before, Tristan. And that's the idea is, but I am still in control. In fact, I'm in more control than they are, even though they're more aggressive.
Oh, there are absolutely times when I have intentionally frustrated what my opponent wanted to do, knowing that they would become, out of frustration, they would become aggressive and they would charge and put themselves out of position and become easy for me to defeat. And that's, I use terrain in doing that, and I use a number of things, but yeah, that's not weakness, but it's that denial in some ways, until they get so frustrated that they forget their own strategy. They forget their own approach.
You know, one of the most memorable experiences I recall having after starting to play around with this was starting out a fight with a fairly defensive mindset, just to have somebody who I knew wanted to throw their favorite shots, and most people have about 2 or 3 of them, and to make sure that they saw me easily block their best stuff. And you can, for the most part, and this was mostly with more intermediate fighters than advanced ones, but as soon as they ran out their repertoire of their favorite shots, their favorite combinations, you could almost see them go, uh-oh, what do I do now? You could feel their mind shift from that confidence into, well, I threw all of my great stuff, and now what do I? And that is when you start to change the pace on them. And that's what I relate to this, become the enemy. It's like you think about, well, what happens when all of the favorite stuff that always works for you suddenly doesn't work? What happens to your mind then? And I think that kind of feathers into the next topic, which is, it says to release 4 hands. And I'm really curious if Eli's translation is different from this.
It says undoing 4 hands.
Undoing 4 hands. Okay.
And it's an expression, the footnote in this translation said, the expression is still used today in traditional sumo, Japanese wrestling, to take a 4 hands position in which full body contact, they grabbed a hold of the belt of their opponent with both hands. And so it's all 4 hands, or they've grabbed each other. So it refers to that.
Okay.
Undoing that position, that 4 hands.
Yep. And sumo, for those who don't know, sumo was huge in the Japanese culture. Like everybody did it. It was almost like, in the US, I don't know, young men playing football in school. Like it was ubiquitous. It was just kind of the sport of Japan. So when I read this, it seemed to me like the 4 hands were probably indicated a clash of some kind, and it does in sumo. Yeah. That is a clash of the bodies. But it says to release 4 hands is used when you and the enemy are contending with the same spirit, and the issue cannot be decided. Yes. And I pictured it with, and you see this sometimes with kendo, where both practitioners come forth and they clash their hands together, swords clash, and they're kind of locked. I guess that would be called a bind in Western martial arts. Neither of them have the advantage, and they're kind of at a standstill. And
they're at an impasse.
They're at an impasse. There's neither of them have a clear advantage.
Exactly. And there's a lot of other sports. I mean, like in push hand, there's the double underhooks, right? To see who's going to throw who. At this point, their arms are engaged. Now it's all about grounding and making sure that you flow with inside those push and pulls.
Right.
You know, we see that in wrestling as well.
Yep, exactly. I think every sport has that.
Mm-hmm.
And it says in large scale strategy, when there is a forehand spirit, do not give up. It is a man's existence. Immediately throw away this spirit and win with a technique that the enemy does not expect. I've always liked what they don't expect, but do not give up, I think, is the key to that. And maybe if you're overconfident and you think, well, I should have just mowed over this person, and now you don't. Now you're in a clash. Now you've gotten the surprise of your life. You thought what was going to go pretty easy didn't. That's where I think it's don't let your own spirit become diminished and lose your confidence by saying, well, this should have worked and it didn't. So I think be careful. That's how I read that one. It says in single combat also, when we think we have fallen into the forehand situation, we must defeat the enemy by changing our mind and applying a suitable technique according to his condition.
Exactly.
And I would highlight that, changing our mind. If there was one thing about combat and about fighting in general, whether it's how do you train, the way you execute your technique, the way you approach your fighting in terms of mindset, in terms of everything, just be ready to change your mind, because chances are you're wrong about something. And a plateau is when you're wrong about something, but you think you're right, and you keep doing it, and you keep running. You hit the ceiling, and you can't go any farther.
So there's like this. There's this recurring theme that I'm seeing in the book, where it's like everything has contrast. So if they're attacking you strong, then give them weak. Or if they're he quotes, if they're thinking like mountains, attack like the sea. If they think like the sea, attack like the mountains. All these kinds of things, where if they're doing one thing, then give them something else that's opposite of that.
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite things of watching, and this kind of goes through of becoming the enemy, but in watching the energy of somebody, because Bess is listening. Hey Bess, wish we had you on tonight. We could definitely use your personality. But she mentions about an opponent who's frustrated and throwing wildly. I always love seeing that, because I know how much energy it takes to throw shots that are not going anywhere, and to be, vigorously trying and even over trying to make something happen in a fight. And so at those times, I always liked kind of luring somebody into throwing more shots, thinking they're going to get land, and then kind of slip them and just say, go ahead and burn up all that lovely energy. Just start swinging away, work harder. You're going to get there if you just keep working a little harder, and you just wait them out. Really, you let them burn, and then they kind of like what I talked about with the defense part. You let them realize they've thrown the kitchen sink at you. It didn't work, but now they're also they're mentally off their balance. They're also physically exhausted, because it takes a lot of energy to do that.
Yeah, that's a huge game. That's playing the long game a little bit. Sometimes you want to enter into something when you have total control over what could happen, and step into something that exactly the 3 best blows they're going to throw, or the combination they're going to throw, and suck that combination up, and then step right in their face like that didn't mean nothing. Mm-hmm. Because now you're breaking them mentally. Mm-hmm. The other way is, sometimes we'll work people, and you can see them come down and relax. That's when you want to push them and pull them back up into tension, get them to throw, so they're using energy. The more they throw, the more they hit your shield or miss, the more the more they learn that they can't hit you. Mm-hmm. And mentally, that is a slow rolling degrading of it takes its strain. Just mind and body are one, and your mind will essentially make your body fail. Right. And we see that lifting weights. We talked about this before. You could be lift the weights until you can't pull your legs up anymore. And you're like, oh, okay, I can't even move my legs. They'll stick electrodes on them, stimulate them, and they can move whatever way they want. It's not only the muscles fatiguing. It's not really that. It's your mind stopping you many times. And this is why we get super acts of strength, when a mother lifts a car off of someone, or, they can't do that normally. They're not, doing that kind of stuff. But at that point, their mind isn't engaged, and physically it's so fast and it happens so fast that they are doing stuff that could literally hurt them. Our mind is the governor to stop us from being hurt.
Right. And I wanted to mention this too, two quick little points. And one is that when somebody gets close to hitting you, but doesn't quite get there, but they think I'm just this close, they will try to go faster. They will speed up and use a little more energy, and they'll keep trying to just like, I'm almost there, and they'll start to burn out even faster. But what I wanted to address was also, in addition to that one, was when you're the one who just threw your 3 or 4 favorite things and maybe a couple of your favorite combinations and they don't work, rather than say, now I'm going to start throwing risky stuff that I have no idea if it's going to work or not. Just realize that you had the right technique. You maybe just did it at the wrong moment, or there was something about your opponent's condition or the situation that was not the right fit. It wasn't at the right time. You didn't lure them off into being out of position first. And one of my favorite examples of this is the classic rising snap, and I think everybody who's an intermediate fighter has gone through, wow, this rising snap works great. And then it starts to not. And usually because they're not facing brand new people or fairly inexperienced fighters anymore, they're facing somebody who's somewhat decent, and they walk up to them, set up, and they try to do that rising snap when the opponent's ready for it. The best time to throw it is that time between when your opponent starts to decide what they're going to do and then they start to move, because now they're thinking about themselves. They're not watching you as closely as they are thinking of executing their own technique. And that's where the technique itself isn't wrong. It's when you do it that's crucial. And I think that this also plays into to become the enemy, like to study when their mind is taken with something, and that's a good opportunity for that technique, if that makes sense. All right, let's move to move the shade. To move the shade is used when you cannot see the enemy's spirit. In large-scale strategy, when you cannot see the enemy's position, indicate that you are about to attack strongly to discover his resources. It is easy to then defeat him with a different method once you see his resources. In single combat, if the enemy takes up a rear or side attitude of a longsword so that you cannot see his intention, make a feint attack, and the enemy will show his longsword, thinking he sees your spirit. Benefiting from what you are shown, you can win with certainty. If you are negligent, you will miss the timing. And I think for this, you could study Rangvalder's champions fight from Pennsic. I think you see that feeling out. And we've had full episodes about how to read opponents and how to start to manipulate them. And I think it's a difficult topic to cover because of how intricate it can be. Like, people want to know, okay, well, what sort of tells should I be looking for? How do I draw somebody with a feint, and what should I be looking for if I throw a feint, and what reactions should I be looking to exploit? And
you must study this.
Yeah, that's where the research this well is going to come into play. Simply because people move so differently, they respond so differently, and there's so many different ways for them to move and respond that it would take a giant database to sort out all of those different things to read and then how to respond to them.
So it's probing them to see how they like to respond.
Right, exactly. And I know Bronis is big on this, and I think it's a testament to, if you want to win smart, you manipulate your opponent and you feel them out, and you do your reconnaissance to find out how you can hit them at a time in a moment where they cannot hit you. It's not merely overwhelming their defense or what have you.
When Musashi talks about in individual strategy, if you make a feint and attack, and the term he's using, or moving the shade, moving the shadow, is used in kendo and refers to making a fainted attack, missed. And if someone has a guard, you can see their intention, as Musashi says. You can see the reaction, and we've seen this when we're just demonstrating something. When you make a movement and somebody will react, even you don't have a sword, you're not in armor, and they're still, their body will twitch in response. Being able to read that does take study and practice and observation, and but that's he's talking about that it is part of your strategy to understand. It's part of the method to understand your opponent's mind and their spirit by seeing how they will react to what you do, and then you can use that.
Yeah, and in fact, I think this is the fundamental key anytime you go into a fight, right? It's interesting because we get a lot of feedback on outside movement, or essentially moving around people at a distance when they don't feel like you're a threat. But what's happening even inside that movement is a threat, right? I mean, you can see if an opponent, it turns at the same pace you're actually tracking them. If they pick up small differences as you're cutting corners and getting closer or not, because all of those things are things that you're reading in a fight. And so, a lot of times this is about probing people. So these are the first piece of entering the fight. And then in the fight, a lot of people are like, okay, I'm going to throw. It's like almost every time I throw, and you have to change this, but almost a lot of times when I throw, there's a small shoulder fake before something else. And sometimes that shoulder fake, in fact, in some top end fights, I'll throw a fake. The first one will be a very small, relaxed fake to see what tension I pull. The next one will be a fake to see, it will be a little bigger, a little bit more sold. In other words, I make it look better to see if they're just looking for a counter. So the first one's to see if it's possible. Second one is to see if it's a counter. The third one, I might throw or half throw or really make it look like I'm in full position to throw it or not, to see exactly what they're going to do. And then I throw all that away and I go on to the other 2 or 3 or 4 fakes that I'm doing, or setups I'm doing, because I'm not tied to the one. I'm doing this through 3 or 4 different setups. So I have to leave that. You can't just keep driving down that lane, because then they'll say, okay, well, now it's in my head. I'm going to move my block over here. So now you move it around, you see what's natural, you make sure it's natural, and then you execute.
And then the modern military refers to this as the OODA loop, the
OODA
observe, orient, decide, act loop, where you're and it's exactly what this is, that you're observing, you're probing, you're testing, and you make a decision and you act upon it. But it's the same principle. It really is the same principle that Musashi wrote about so long ago. So
Beth points something out here. She asked, and I'm typing to her as we talk. She essentially says, what I hear you saying is you don't throw a blow in the beginning of a fight. Well, I see this way too many times, right? It's like, I go out there, my job, I got to throw a blow because that's what everybody trained me to do, is throw a blow. Right? Isn't that what we do? The problem is we haven't figured out the fight yet. Every time you throw a blow defensively, you are weak. Your opponent could have already figured out the fight, waiting for you to throw a blow. In fact, could be baiting you to throw a blow so he can counter throw it. You don't know if he's a counter shooter or not yet. So just by getting in there, getting to that point, throwing a fake, and if you see that person looking like they're going to counter, well, guess what? You just met. So now you understand more. The more you understand your opponent, the more you see, the more you're able to execute a real fight. Otherwise, you're just throwing stuff out there.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. All right. Well, now we'll go on to the next one, to pass on. And it says, many things are said to be passed on. Sleepiness can be passed on, and yawning can be passed on. Time can be passed on also. Now, Eli, is that the same heading on in your translation?
So there's, in the shadow section, what was the moving your shadow?
Mm-hmm.
There was also constricting your shadow.
Yes.
Which is, and essentially it's what we've been talking about. You constrict their when you see what they're going to do, you forestall it in some way. So when you're moving on to the things are said to be passing on, here's what I call inflecting, is the translation in this version, and it's essentially means a transference or something that contagious that passes on, but here they call it inflecting, and it has to do with the nature of the translation of the language. But yes, things are infectious: sleep, yawns, and so on. So it's a little different translation, but it's how you influence them. Well, it's what Bronis has been talking about, that you're inflecting their decision of energy, high or low, and their spirit, and seizing that opportunity. So getting them to relax, and then, or getting them to come up in energy and seizing that opportunity.
So not only is it a fight, but it's a communication between you and your opponent, and it's all about telling them what you want them to know, or telling them what you want them to see. And Musashi says, show calmness, relax, and then react swiftly. So it's like giving them one thing, then you take it and you give them something different, changing it up.
And as I read this, the paragraphs on to pass on, there's a term that I really like to use called mirroring, and I remember running into this initially and I was an intermediate fighter at the time. And what I found is if I was facing an opponent that was skilled and experienced and precise, I would become like that. And then within a minute or two, I'd go face somebody who is a very sloppy, messy fighter, and I would become like that myself. And I felt like there was a threshold when I stopped doing that and said, I'm not going to become sloppy just because my opponent's sloppy. I'm going to try to be precise and accurate and tight. My fighting was tight, and I wasn't going to be drawn into a messy fight by somebody who was kind of had a messy fight themselves. And I can see here where Musashi talks about, in single combat, you can win by relaxing your body and spirit, and then catching on the moment your enemy relaxes. Your opponent mirrors you, and then he says you attack strongly and quickly, forestalling him, which is, I think, intercepting or seizing control of that initiative. And I found that there was even another layer to that, and this came with choosing ranges. And this is something that I kind of fell into almost accidentally, but I liked it. And what I noticed was fighters tend to have different methods for dealing at range. They tend to fight at the C range, like they have a certain set of things they like to do there. In A range, they tend to shift up and do a completely different stance. Their body posture tends to change. Their guard will often change. And then they'll do kind of one for a B range as well. Now, some fighters are pretty consistent and they're not very different, but they are quite a bit different. And what I found that I liked to do was to feel out which range is my opponent most comfortable at. Like, what is his favorite range to be there? And, the better an opponent gets, they're not bad at any of them. They have one that's probably a little better than the other, but, that's their favored one. But what I found was I'd go to find a range fighter at C range, and I'd well, how about I jump into A and just see how he goes with the clinch. Okay. And then I'd jump in close and I'd see his feet switch and his posture change. And then I'd jump back out, and then he'd have to jump to his C range stance and guard position. And then I go back to A range. So what I found was if I could switch quicker, then he was always trying to keep up with how do I change into my A range game versus my C range game versus my B range game. I did find that the B range was generally the most dangerous. But shifting from essentially C to A and back and forth, there were a lot of fighters, even good ones, that had a hard time shifting because they would treat each fight quite differently. And within those gaps, while they're shifting, was a good time to lay one on them. Any comments on that?
I'll jump in. 100%. I mean, it's sometimes there are times, and you're right, B is those transitions through B are very dangerous.
Risky, very
especially
risky.
Especially against so what happens in that B range is your opponent, most opponents go into reactionary mode. They're not thinking about the blow. They're just executing. And because you're in movement, there's opportunity there to be hit. And there's another conversation about that in a different forum where, there's the three ranges, but then there's all the timing through motion, all those times a lot of people are like, I'm going to throw at this range, I'm going to throw at this range, or I'm going to throw at this range. And they have to be in one of those to set up their shots, right? If I'm a beginning fighter, I'm like, I'm going to move to B and then I'm going to throw shots. They forget that from C to B, they could be throwing shots. The great fighters can throw shots from C to B to A. And so they have a multitude of shots across all three because they're throwing in between. And that's what makes them super dangerous because they're ready to throw at any of those points compared to, I'm going to set myself up out here and I'm going to throw. And, so you have those, first you have that danger, right? But, 100%, what you want to do is those quick changes will also start breaking down them mentally, right? Because they have to switch. Anytime somebody has to switch into something they're not used to, they're in a weakness, right? And even if you're not good, even if they're a C player and you're a C player, you may want to jump in a little bit and see what their A game is, and then make sure that look confident in that game so that they're like, oh, I can't let him here. So every time you make it look like you're going to throw in, then you can throw a C, make it look like you're going to jump in and then throw a C range shot. All of a sudden they're like, oh, no, too late. Right. Mm-hmm. So you're using that transition to create other things. And it's first, you got to lay in the foundation to them that they appreciate what's happening. In other words, it can happen. It has happened. Now I have to watch it.
Right.
So if I'm always playing at the edge of C and they know it, then they're confident in what they do. If all of a sudden you jump in and then jump out, they're like, oh, I'm not sure where he's going to be, now that you're just breaking down that confidence.
So, Brian, you have a question which is just related to what you mean by when you talk about different ranges.
So I think there was a couple of questions there, actually, but yes. So, the idea, we talk about ABC range. There's tons of different ways people call this, but what I have seen across most of the SCA is the ABC range tends to be used quite a bit. There's some people call it D or void range. A is very close to your opponent, almost toe to toe. There's not much range between their body and your body. B is usually anywhere from that point to what they call the edge of range, which is C. So B could be, a foot away from your opponent, could be a foot and a half away from your opponent. Anything that's not the edge of range. The edge of range is where you're standing. You can lean in, throw a shot, lean out, they'll miss. So that's the edge of range. And those are all used very tightly. So you want to know what those are. You don't need to know the names. You just need to understand them.
Snipers will play at that C range, that right out.
And sometimes D. Sometimes D. They'll void out for a second and come back in.
Right.
And they use this. This is where that other piece that we were just talking about comes. Sometimes they'll void out. They'll make themselves look like they're voided out, but they're not truly voided out. So what happens is they look like they're voided out, and you relax a little bit, and then they throw. They do exactly what Louis said, and that is speed up and throw a shot. That's that. If you ever have a chance, get in a big fight, and as soon as the energy, you're like, mostly you can feel like you're at the end of a fight or a pass, and breathe out and relax. But in your mind, just breathe out, and then when they start breathing out, throw the shot. Because what happens is, this is exactly that control he's talking about. A lot of times your opponent's reading you, and when you're like, okay, he's relaxing, I'm going to relax. But the difference is you're not truly relaxing, you're waiting. Right? I can breathe out and still throw. So that's that relax and throw scenario. Your opponent, and you talked about this, Tristan, will mimic you. And what you want to do is use
subconsciously, not even through a conscious choice.
100%. I mean, I've been reading a lot on it. Once again, I'm going through The Art of Learning by Josh Wickens. And, in push hand, they watch eye blinks. They watch, I used to watch people when they start breathing out. I used to watch that as well. They watch it because I used to use that for a person would start breathing out. And then I jump into range, like B range, sometimes A range, and make them suck all that bad air in and pull tension when they don't have any oxygen left. The more you do that, the faster they break down. I've seen Brongvalder make people throw up because they've done that so much that their body starts cramping. I've had guys cramp and have to sit down or lay down on the ground because I've done it. It's what's happening is their body is starving of oxygen.
Body's starting to what?
Starving of oxygen.
Starving.
What's happening is, as soon as somebody starts breathing out and you jump on them, they never had the breath. They actually sucked the air they were trying to push out back in. And they never get a breath. They're slowly choking.
Yeah, the old adage, can't breathe, can't fight.
That's it.
So yeah, and I like that question that Bess put up. So how does one force one to relax and be tense without being tense yourself? Realize that there is a subconscious perception going on there. Don't think that just because you lower your helmet like you were breathing, like you're exhaling and you're not, that somebody will see that. They won't. You really have to actually be relaxed and to exhale if you want them to read that and respond to it. It's study on this well.
She's gonna love that one. She's gonna come.
Oh yeah, right in there for you. Yep. And when I train people with Aikido, we're doing a lot of contact stuff. And what will often happen is, especially with newer people and up to intermediates, is they'll close in and you'll get hand contact, usually some kind of a grip. And they think, I need to throw with my hands. So they start to use their hands, but they won't be affecting the actual person's posture. Because if you want to move their whole body, you got to use your whole body. You can't just use your hands to do it unless you outweigh your partner by 30, 40 pounds, or you're incredibly stronger or more. So usually the lesson for them is to use your whole body to move their whole body. And if you're not moving their whole body, you're not using yours. So remember to use the legs, remember to use your body. And that kind of brings us right into the next topic. Yeah, Brian, is the difference of tension is who's controlling it. Absolutely. It kind of comes into initiative, but I think that's another topic. But when we talk about the next topic in the book, which is to cause loss of balance. Now, this one is right into the Aikido wheelhouse, because I was amazed at how little the posture and balance can be disturbed and wind up having a body be useless in terms of being able to deliver power, being able to move, and in Aikido's case, being able to actually take somebody down. If I can move somebody's shoulders over about 3/4 of an inch, I can take them right down without any problem. And
the translation I have refers to this as irritating your adversary or being annoying, and says you can be annoying, or you can become someone can become irritated in different ways. The limits of danger, facing the impossible, surprise, or a loss of balance. And balance, I think, in the sense of this section, is about not just their physical balance, but their mental balance, their emotional equilibrium. Upsetting any of those, physically, emotionally, mentally, any of those upsetting, like we talked about, interrupting somebody's breathing, all of those are irritating. They're upsetting to the balance of the person, physically or emotionally.
Yeah, and Bess made that question too. It said might also be, might it be mentally unbalanced? Absolutely.
Exactly.
We will use in Aikido and other Japanese martial arts use the term kazushi, and it's the taking of balance or posture. And there's a great story, and I'm sure this is just some kind of anecdote. It probably is not a true story, but it drives it home anyway. Guy goes into his bathroom and he looks down and he sees this little like 3-inch lizard in the bathtub, and he's like, okay, well, I got to get this out of here. So he steps in the tub, he reaches down to grab this little like salamander or something, and the thing jumps on his neck. Well, he jumps back and freaks out and falls on his back on the bathroom floor. Well, did the lizard throw the guy? No, he didn't. But he totally captured his mind. It was that kazushi, the taking of balance. It was a mental shock that caused a physical reaction. So when we talk about taking balance, can be physical, can be mental, and usually the physical will follow the mental. If somebody's mentally unbalanced, generally their body will not be physically balanced. And one of the principles that we will often teach in Aikido is they call it mind-body unification. So your mind has to be balanced and your body has to be balanced, and you can't really have one without the other. If you have a separation and one is out of balance and one is in, your overall being is not balanced. So you are not ready. Even though you might be in physical good posture, your mental state will not let you perform. And I've run into this where an opponent will either unbalance themselves or allow me to easily unbalance them by doing something even as simple and stupid as forgetting to move their feet. And they tip back because they want to be out of range, but they forgot to let their legs do it, and they let their upper body do it, or they lean too far forward, or they lean too far sideways. All of these are possible to do in combat, but realize when you do them, you're sacrificing your mobility and your ability to stay in the fight. You're giving up initiative for just a moment until you get your posture back. And
so I got a question for you.
Go ahead.
What's so people can understand it? What's an unbalanced mind?
Good question. It's, I don't know a simple way to describe it. It's a mind that's either disturbed or surprised, startled. I think everybody's experienced what it's like to have something unexpected happen, or even be in a mindset where they are not so much surprised, but they're not relaxed, they're not calm, they are disturbed. And this, I mean, everybody's had this happen in their real life where something happens, you've been agitated, you're not thinking right. You're not acting the way that you normally would by usually some external influence. You get in an argument with your spouse or a family member, a parent, and you walk away and you just know there's something wrong with what's going on in your head. Like you're not thinking quite straight. And it doesn't mean you've completely lost your mind. You're not insane or anything, but you're just not in a good state.
Or it could just be your last exchange, like you almost didn't catch the block, and now that's
Yes.
weighing on you, and you're thinking about it,
Yep.
and you're not thinking about fighting.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I know we've talked about this too, about the frustrations that we often have with ourselves of saying, I'm not fighting my fight today, or nothing is going right. And you kind of dump a pile of bricks on yourself by saying, I should be doing better than this, or this is not going the way I expected it to. And you can introduce that unbalancing yourself, kind of like the guy with the lizard, 3-inch lizard jumps on a 200-pound guy. Why would the guy fall over? It's what's going on in his own head.
Yeah, not physically.
Right.
It's mentally.
It's not a physical thing at all. But boy, the mental has a drastic effect on the physical.
Yeah. No, that was a great answer. I wanted people to understand that. And Louis, that's exactly in a fight. Not only what you have to watch in yourself, this goes way back to the first thing we talked about. Not only what we have to watch in ourselves, but how we can watch it in others and take advantage of it.
Very much so. Yeah. And some people are easy to cause them to lose balance, and others are very difficult. It's not necessarily clear the best way to do it or how much it takes to do it. But if you start playing around with it, you'll get a feel for, what it's like to have somebody go out of balance. And we've talked a bit about the mental, but there's also the physical. Like how good is their footwork? If you get them to start stepping around and start seeing them overstepping, understepping, cross-stepping, being too top heavy, you can start seeing how just moving around you can get them into a position of being out of balance just because of how they step. Of course, this is the importance of the ladder drills and improving your own footwork so you don't get caught on that side of things, of being physically out of balance. But I think when I've seen students develop, when they start realizing they need to tidy up what's going on in their head, usually you see a parallel, their footwork starts to tighten up too.
Yep.
And you can also, the reverse winds up happening. If you need to help somebody sort things out in their head and they're having trouble, they're struggling with it, get them to do footwork drills and get them to tighten up their footwork. And usually the mind starts tidying up after that too. There's a great parallel there with developing students that way.
Absolutely. And a lot of that is you get into that, you help them believe in their training. That's what training, that's when you're busting out training. That's what you fall back onto is what you have done in your training.
Sure. Well, it looks about 6 minutes left. I think we got time to cover one more, and I think this is a good one to wrap the show up on, to frighten.
Yeah.
Right. So this is
going to be this one all day long. Fright often occurs caused by the unexpected, and I think that unexpected is certainly at play. And I loved how you talked about getting somebody used to playing at C range and then jumping right into A and then jumping back and making them question their expectation of, is this what is going to happen? You are introducing the unexpected.
So Louis, go ahead and you were just gonna you talked about that being my key eye and
I mean, it's something you love to do. So
yeah.
And you startle somebody a little bit and it makes them think, and while they're thinking, they're not fighting. So
yeah, and it's interesting because there's a part of this talks about using voice in battle, the battle voice before the fight starts, the voice after, or actually, when you striking, or after you strike, and then the final you won type of voice in kind of in battle in melee. And some of that could be, in melee, a lot of times I'll run up and I'll be way outside spear length. I'll be like, hey, and you're like, well, every time they look over to you, that's breaking concentration. That's flooding their mind with thought, and they have to. The more they think, the less they're free to perform. So that's all part of that. And then there's that soft breath out when you're hitting somebody. It's like, huh, letting that air flow, right? But it's low. It's not a scream. And then we don't do the after battle, but that is part. We can see that in some other things like like basketball or football or all of those other ones. That victory, allowing that energy out.
I just hire a bagpiper to stay on the sidelines, and
that'd do it, man.
Yeah.
So he also mentions flanking or frightened rhythm too. So I mean, it doesn't have to be just an audible thing too. It could be anything to change and add a little bit of confusion or to introduce something they're not expecting.
So Tristan, would you say that this is all about the unexpected, that frightening, right? I mean, that's what we're talking about.
Well, yes, unexpected, and I like that Louis spotted that flanking part, because anybody who's been in a melee realizes when you're being flanked, what's about to happen next is very unpleasant, and that will disturb a lot of people, and so that brings you into that being frightened realm when you realize this isn't going very well. I don't like how this is shaken down. So I think there's many ways to become frightened, and there are probably many different ways of frightening people. So that's kind of what I would take away from that one.
Well, it sort of going back to the OODA loop. It sort of kicks them out of the OODA loop, restarts them, and makes them start observing again. So wherever they're at, it's kind of like a reset.
Yep, exactly. So, well, I think we made it to about the 2/3 point through the fire book tonight. Number of topics, and it's one of those things when we take these on, we don't want to just blast through them and just take one and talk about it for a minute or two, and then that's all. It's nice to give these their due thought, because as you read these, at least when I did, we get used to reading at a pace where we're going through a page every few minutes, and this book just does not lend itself to that. You kind of have to go through each little topic and think it through. Like you have to start to peel the onion, so to speak. And so as we've gone through this, read this with your own thoughts, your own interpretations, because you're going to compare this to, and I think this comes back to that at the end of each one of these, you should research this well. Use what you know already and compare it to see what makes sense for what you've read here to what you've experienced. That's where this book will start to dig into you and start letting you really grow from it, I think.
That's why I recommend that people not just read this once, but reread it every few years, depending on where they are, what their progress is, because it means something different, because it requires you to bring your own knowledge and experience to this. And as you grow in knowledge and experience, the writing takes on different meaning. And so I recommend rereading this every few years, depending on where you are and what you're doing.
Definitely. And you'll see something new in it every time you pick it up. Yep. That's for sure. It's one of the most remarkable books for that. All right.
Before we drop, I just want to say something. We'll find that the conversation rolls a lot of times from from one piece of what he talks about to another piece what he talks about, but that's actually what's happening in a fight as well. You're using all of these things. You're not going to stick in one. You apply, you see it, and then you apply some other discipline that he's talking about. And if you get caught in the forehand scenario, then you have to go down to shocking or frightening somebody to break out of that. So, the idea is these will flow from one to another. And so, when we talk about it, you can see some of that happening, and it's a good way to think about it. And the other piece is when it goes and says, you should train well, you should do these things well, you should read this well, or whatever. This isn't, okay, well, I'm just going to go and train this. This is a lifelong pursuit of understanding what he is talking about. This isn't, I'm going to train this for a year and then move on. It's a constant. And to get to where he was, and to get to where any master is, it is always a constant of all these are the disciplines that he saw while he was going through. He even admitted he don't believe he was a master until late. And in fact, a lot of people don't believe he was a master until his very late ages. When he was well past all his big fights and everything else, that's when he thought he became a true, swordsman. Before that, he was still practicing and trying to get there. And he wrote this book right through that time period, right? At the end of that time period. And so, we talk about these things, but these are things that and this is where Eli, you nailed it. Go read it again. Because a year from now, it'd be different. A year from that, it'd be different. A year from that, it'd be different. Because you'll understand more and more each time.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Eli, Louis, do you have any final thoughts you'd like to wrap up with?
I think I gave mine.
Yeah, I just think there's so much depth to the information in the book, and it doesn't matter really how skilled you are or proficient you are. There is so much more to pull out of this, and to develop over time. It's pretty impressive.
It is indeed an impressive work. It's one of my favorites, and every time I read it, I kind of like, boy, I was kind of dumb last time. I didn't pick this up, or there's something I missed, or it didn't make sense, but yeah, it's refreshing to realize that when you do come back and you get new insights to it, that it's a reflection that you've grown, and that you get a little bit more direction on how to grow further. So I find it a very uplifting book that way, inspirational. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a part 3 coming at some point. Maybe we won't have as quite as long of a time gap as we did between 1 and 2 on this one, but we've covered a lot of great content. Now, next week, we've got an episode titled The Emotional Cost of Fighting. And that has to do with believing in yourself and your prowess and your training, and getting past the part of the fight that's obsessed with winning and losing or failure. We all love SCA fighting. It's not. It's an activity that is very deeply emotionally connected to us, and so that can be kind of a double-edged sword. It can be really good, but it can also be acidic to you. And so we're gonna talk about that and get into it in depth.
Some great coaches on that too, right?
What's that? Yep. We're going to have me, Sean, Rongwalder, and Alan on, or looks like possibly Rongwalder. Not sure yet. We'll see. Hopefully we get him. So that should be a very good discussion. So thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight, and have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next week.
Thank you, guys.
Good night, everybody.
Have a great weekend.